Let's talk about another almost impossible to solve problem, which is Russia and Ukraine and the possible peace talks. We know they're not going to go ahead in the way that potentially they had been billed to today. Remember, President Zelensky had said he would turn up and speak to President Putin in Istanbul if the Russian president was willing to do so. He said he's not. David Lammy has said Russia is sending a low-level group of individuals. And a short time ago, President Trump, who was the one who really sort of built this up as a big moment, said, when asked about President Putin not attending, said, well, why would he go if I'm not going to go? Which is quite some U-turn from Donald Trump. Incidentally, the American president is going to be speaking in around half an hour's time, so we'll keep an eye on that and bring you any of the best bits in around
what an extraordinary thing
half
to say.
an hour.
Because we just basically said Trump was saying, we heard Sebastian Gorka saying Putin's making a mistake and the pressure's going to be put on him. But now Trump's saying, I guess it's about, both of them are very good at saving face. Maybe it's just a face-saving exercise.
I think that might be what's happening. Dominic, I mean, where does this go from here? Maybe it was always ambitious to think that these two men could meet in this way at this moment in time. What do you think realistically could be the next steps here?
Well, there is not a chance of peace because Russia's minimum demands are essentially that Ukraine disarms almost entirely. And indeed, I think, because Putin says, well, we have to address the fundamental causes. So he's also said that NATO should withdraw from Eastern Europe, thus making it easier for him to take the next stage in his campaign to recreate the Soviet or Russian Empire. So it's completely impossible. The problem is, I don't know whether I can say this on radio, that Trump is Putin's bitch. And
well, you've done it now, Dominic.
Yeah, well, he is. He is.
Apologies if anybody was offended by that.
And we've seen this consistently. The point about Trump is it's all about him and his family. The Trump Organization was essentially rescued by Russian money after American and European banks basically gave up on him. Trump's son, Eric, when he was asked, this was, I think, 2014, it was the year that Russia invaded Crimea, and he was asked how they could buy all these golf courses, where are they getting the money from? And he said, well, basically, we don't need Western banks because we get all the money from Russian investors. And with Trump, it's all to do with his own financial interests. We've seen it repeatedly with the crypto coin. And so naturally, he first of all says, Zelensky must immediately go to Ankara to go to these peace talks. And then Putin, as you say, doesn't show up. And then Trump says, well, why should he? So at every stage, he makes demands of Zelensky and the Ukrainians, the victims in this horrible war, and seeks at all times to exonerate Putin, on whom he has a kind of disgusting man crush.
Maybe we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think Dominic puts it very forcefully, the idea of Trump being Putin's bitch. But it does seem to be, at the very least, Jenny, that he does take Putin's side. Whenever it's a 50-50 or a 60-40, it's always in Putin's favour.
It is, and isn't that depressing? I mean, it's depressing and not surprising, as is the fact that Putin's not planning on turning up today. This is straight out of Putin's playbook of delay, obfuscation, playing for time, because we know that Putin is not going to move back from his demand that Ukraine give up sovereignty. That is his fundamental demand. That is, it's unconscionable for him that he would row back from that. He is just not going to do it. So all that he does is kind of shuffle his chess pieces around a little bit in order to give himself more time. But yeah, I mean, Dominic's completely right, and it's not a surprise to anyone. And also, I think, as well as being kind of financially in thrall to Putin, I think Trump is really, really impressed by him. He likes he's very admiring of Putin's style. He has much more in common with Xi Jinping and Putin than he does, I think, with European leaders
and the Saudis as well, Jenny. I mean, the thing that the tone of that trip to the Middle East is sort of kings with shiny thrones who are completely he loves that. He feels very sort of comfortable with that one.
That's where he's at home. That's how he'd like to be. You can tell he would love a gold throne. He would love that. So, you know, that is his comfort zone. These are his people, his men, his big, strong men. That's what he likes. And it's really depressing for his former allies when we see that.
Yeah, big boys in boots is something that sort of clearly excites him. Dominic, just finally on this point, then, what's the answer? Because I think you and Jenny are both correct in this, but is the answer this just goes on and on and on? Is this a sort of bad version of North Korea, South Korea, where the fighting continues, there's no permanent peace, or is it where we all lose interest and it becomes like Vietnam and ultimately Russia just keeps chipping away?
Well, actually, because you see, North Korea, South Korea, there was an armistice. The war never officially ended. But what you had there is roughly 20,000 American troops on the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, keeping the peace. And it has been kept. But, of course, Trump has said he has no intention of putting American forces on the ground to guard a demilitarized zone. And frankly, the European and Keir Starmer's idea was laughable, because we can't put in enough people that would impress the Russians or Putin, let alone for 1 second. So it's far worse than the situation between North and South Korea. The answer is, I think, for the EU to do what it said it would do, which was to step up vastly their sanction regime and supply the Ukrainians with all the arms that they need and require. Because the problem for Zelensky, if you can call it a problem, is that on the whole, his own people regard their sovereignty as completely non-negotiable. Yeah. And therefore they will continue to fight, as they have done, heroically.
Yeah, and it feels irreconcilable, doesn't it, at the moment?
Yeah. We're talking about Donald Trump's visit. I have to tell you, if you've not seen page 20 of the Sun newspaper today, go and check it out. It's the Sun in typical fashion. The headline, "Warlord so attractive," says Trump. Donald Trump yesterday hailed a former terrorist warlord as a young, attractive guy. It's very worth reading. It's almost unbelievable, actually. There's also a story under there that the Saudi Arabians have built a mobile McDonald's to feed Donald Trump's craving for egg McMuffins. It was custom built for his visit to Riyadh.
There we go. There's no sign of this being settled anytime soon.
And of course, Ukraine. Making sure that we collectively will do what it takes to make sure that Ukraine can prevail and that we can collectively help Ukraine to bring this war to a lasting and durable peace. So a lot to discuss. Ukraine is ready to commit to a ceasefire and immediate negotiations. That's absolutely clear. The ball is now clearly in Russia's court. They have to explain what they are doing, why they are here or not, and with what team or whatever. But let's make sure that we all understand that the ball is in their court. Ukraine is wanting to start the negotiations as soon as possible. And as I said before, it is thanks to the Americans and President Trump that the deadlock has been broken. It's now up to the Russians to make sure they take the next steps necessary. It is the Ukrainians who have said we are ready to sit down with the Russians, to agree a ceasefire, to immediately go into negotiations about the next steps to bring this terrible war to an end.